Good morning, everybody, and welcome. This is the post-background investigation update workshop. I'm Marty Piccone. I'm going to be leading the presentation this morning. Working alongside me are going to be fellow post employees and fellow regional consultant, Andrew Mendonza, and also staff services manager, Michelle Weiler. Today's presentation is going to be about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes long, and it's going to be via PowerPoint presentation with about a 10-minute break around 10:45 or so. You will be given the opportunity to ask questions during the presentation via your chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen, and at the end of the session, also via the chat box. Andrew and Michelle will be screening the questions and ask me directly every few minutes or so if applicable. As a reminder, please ensure that your computer's video is turned on with your microphone turned off or mute, please. And if you haven't done so already, please add your display name by your video. At the end of the presentation, a survey link is going to be provided, and by completing the survey, this will be the method in which you will obtain post-CPT credit. So no survey though, no CPT credit. So just a reminder, I'll have that at the very end. You might want to take a screenshot with it with your camera, just so you've got that down. And then also, the workshop will be recorded for future viewing and educational opportunities. So, okay, a little bit about me before we go. Like I said, I'm a regional consultant. I cover posts to Region 2, which is the farther northern California counties from above Sacramento all the way to the Oregon border. I've been assigned to post, or actually been working with post for almost 5 years now. And just prior to that, I was with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, where I retired as a sergeant after 26 years. And during that time, I spent a lot of that in training. So I've got a training background and really enjoy it. And that with post has been fantastic. Really enjoyed my assignment so far. So why this workshop? Why this update? Well, first off, let me say that this is not a replacement for the 32-hour post background investigator course. It's a great course. Highly recommend that you take it. Just as a reminder, it is not required by post, but again, it is recommended. It's going to give you more of the legal perspective that I'm not going to cover on today. I'm going to touch on a couple of legal issues, if you will. But it's going to give you more of the these and the thous. It's going to dot more I's, cross more T's. And it's going to teach you how to conduct an interview and so forth, so on and so forth. So really recommend the background course. This update or this workshop is going to be more from the perspective of me as a regional consultant. Over the 5 years, I've been conducting compliance reviews with my agencies and gained a lot of experience on reviewing background files, the files that you prepare for your agencies, and what makes a good file and what maybe needs improvement. And that's what I'm here to do today, is to help bring along some suggestions, some ideas, talk about some common problems that we see as regional consultants when we're doing our compliance reviews, and to help you make what I want to call a strong, defensible background file. Yeah, it's true that when I come to an agency, I have to, because I work for a compliance agency, that I am looking for those dotted I's and those crossed T's. But I also see my role, and I'm sure my partners do with me as well, that we're there to partner with you as a law enforcement agency and the background investigator. And we want to help you, again, make what I consider a strong, defensible file. And how do we do that? Well, that's what I'm here today, is to help you do. I want to get you to a point where, heaven forbid, if any of your officers or dispatchers ever do anything wrong and your department gets sued, a good attorney is going to ask to see probably their training records and more than likely to see their background file. And so I want to get you to a point, and I tell my agencies the same thing, that I want to be able to, you hand over that file to that suing attorney and say, I dare you to find holes in this file. And that's where we want to get you at. And not that you're not there already, but maybe today's workshop will help bring you a little closer and provide some information that might be beneficial. And again, also to possibly help mitigate some liability, some things that I've seen and come across. Also, just want to point out that this is not an indictment on any one background investigator's efforts. We all know that these files are difficult to produce and to put together and to conduct interviews and compile one nice file for the hiring authority, the chief or the sheriff. And so I understand your efforts are many and great. And so no indictment there at all. This, again, is just a compilation of things that I've come across over the years where I can possibly help out. Okay, so moving on to the workshop and the first phase. So I call it the initial background. The initial background is just that. It's that file that you're going to work on for your agency. It's the whole file that's the one big package on, again, defending why you're going to recommend this candidate be hired. So in the Commission Regulations 1953A, talking about the background, it reads that every peace officer candidate shall be the subject of an investigation to verify good moral character and the absence of past behavior indicative of unsuitability to perform duties of a peace officer. So your efforts, your process in putting together the initial background or the background file, it's just not a matter of checking off boxes. It's a huge responsibility. Matter of fact, you are going to be contributing greatly to hiring that officer dispatcher and for the future of your department. You're going to have a big hand in the say of, hey, this guy's a good applicant or possibly not. So we're looking to ensure that you're not just going through this process by just checking off the boxes. And we can tell when we're reading the file, we can see where the investigator has put in good effort, good information, and not just merely just that required info. So the initial background is important. And just here to say that we ask you to do the best job you can, not that you're not, but always more information is better than than not enough information. So now different types of backgrounds. So here's where I get a lot of questions and there's some confusion on what's called the update background. The update is for those peace officers or dispatchers who were originally working with your department and they have left. And if it's been more than 180 days since they have left, then what can be done is what's called an update background. Now, as long as the original background file is available, the update is going to require this: a brand new and full and complete personal history statement, new FBI and DOJ checks, new credit check, a new DMV check. And then if it's been more than 1 year from the time the original medical and psych were conducted, medical and psych if it's a peace officer, medical only if it's a dispatcher. If it's been more than 1 year from the time that medical and psych has been done, then that has to be done as well. So this is a step saver because as an investigator, what you're going to have to do is once the new PHS is completed, is conduct that investigation from the time they left the agency to the time they submitted the new PHS. So that could be 6 months or more. It could be 1 year. It could be 2 years. Now, again, this is only for those people who have left your department and are coming back to your department, okay? And I'll talk about the 180-day policy in a couple seconds. So again, that's the update. So there's confusion from my agencies that, well, Marty, we did the original background investigation for them. They left, and because we have the same file, nothing's required, right? And again, the answer is no. If it's more than 180 days, an update is going to be needed. And what's nice about the update is that you only have to investigate again from the new PHS until the time that they left. So they may have got a new job, they may have got divorced, they may have got married, they may have worked for other employers where you're going to make new contacts and just investigate that window. Now, one of the things I encourage you to do is to make a separate update file. And when that file is done, rubber band it to the original file so that when we come do the compliance reviews, we'll know that this is an update background and that we won't have to look for certain items. So again, that's the update. Now, as I talked about earlier, the 180-day policy. So a couple years ago, Post enacted this policy that if you have an officer or dispatcher who voluntarily leaves your department, that means doesn't leave due to discipline reasons, but voluntarily leaves your department and wants to return your department, if they come back within 180 days, no back-end is required by Post. Now, your chief or your sheriff may require, but Post does not. So now if it's day 181, then now they are eligible for the update background. So again, that update is a nice tool and it's a time saver. Now again, your chief or sheriff, even if they've come back within 180 days, they may require the whole background, and even if it's beyond that, your department may require a full background investigation. Okay, reinstatements. Reinstatements are usually a result of a disciplinary process that's been reversed. So there's really not a background process per se, but the agency may ask you as the investigator to do two things that are required. So first off, within 30 days of reinstatement, the agency needs to submit the NOAT, or the Notice of Appointment and Termination form. And it's marked in the correction box. That will be mailed in with a copy of the official reinstatement documentation. So you want to ensure that those two things are done. Now, what's going to need to be done possibly on your part as a background investigator is that you're going to have to run a new DOJ and FBI check if they've been removed from the FBI and DOJ watch list. If they haven't, then no DOJ or FBI check has to be conducted. But if they have, a new live scan needs to be conducted, and then also a DMV records check has to be done. Now, the part where verifying U.S. citizenship, that's kind of unique. I'm assuming there that that's going to require that if they were in the citizenship application process when they were dismissed by the agency, you just need to ensure that that citizenship application has been completed. So again, those are reinstatements.
Marty, we had a question on medical and psychs from Christopher.
Sure.
I think it was in regards to reinstatements.
Okay. So so for no medical and psych are required, only for the update background. And again, the medical and psych, if it's been more than 1 year since the original, then new medical and new psych have to be done, but nothing for reinstatements. That's just for those who are returning to the agency, non-disciplinary action. I'm hoping that's making sense.
I think they got it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. All right. Another area that causes some confusion, that's on lateral transfers. The most common area that seems to get some mix-up is when that lateral is coming from one agency to the next when they're in the same county, the same jurisdiction, if you will. So a classic example is a deputy sheriff who's going to the local PD or vice versa. And the argument or the question I get is, hey, Marty, I've got an applicant that's coming over from the sheriff's department to work for my PD. We're in the same county. The sheriff's department did the investigation, so no update or no background is required, right? Unfortunately, no. A lateral transfer is to be considered as though they are a brand new applicant. Never been a peace officer before, well, not a brand new, but a brand new applicant. There is no exception. Now, I say that to say this. In the post-commission regulations, there is an exception for this. And the exception is that if a county has a central background investigation unit, so let's say that Sacramento County has one office that does all of its investigations for all of its PDs and sheriff's departments. It's one central clearinghouse. If that's the case, then if an officer does transfer from within that county, no background is needed. But I don't know of any county currently in the state of California that has that one central clearing office, if you will. So again, a lateral transfer is as if though they are a brand new peace officer and they have to do that whole process again. Now, when I'm referring to qualifying service, what you're going to want to need to know or confirm, especially for reserves when they're going to transfer over, is you're going to want to ensure they've been maintaining their qualifying service or their training. Level 1 reserves have to maintain an average. Now, this is an average of 16 hours of working per month. They have to work 16 hours per month. So if let's say they're a reserve officer, level 1 reserve for another agency, and they do seasonal work. Let's say they do hundreds of hours during the summer because they work a boat patrol, as an example. So just as long as they are averaging 16 hours per month, they're going to qualify for consideration as being hired by your agency. That's what I mean by qualifying service. So what you want to do ahead of time when you get a lateral transfer applicant who was a level 1 reserve, you want to ask them up front as an investigator, hey, have you been maintaining your 16 hours of work during this whole time? So you want to ensure that. Double badging. Double badging, an example is here in Sacramento, there's the Cal Expo State Fair Police. And so a number of officers in this area, in the Sacramento area, who work for the Sheriff's Department or SACP or the local agencies, they go work for Cal Expo Police when the fair is on for that 2-week period. They'll usually take some vacation and go and work for them. However, Cal Expo is still responsible for conducting their own background investigation on those officers. So that's double badging. So that you can't overlook that. So if you have other officers who work for you, for instance, Santa Clara PD and covering the 49ers games, I know that originally they were taking other officers to work football games. So that was double badging or other events at Levi Stadium. Santa Clara PD, who runs that whole office, that security for the Niners, they would have to conduct background investigations for those officers. So that's double badging. Now, contract agencies. So let's say that you contract with the local sheriff's department to provide services for your agency. And they give you either dispatchers or they give you officers to assist with your department on a contracting basis. Now, your agency as the contractee does not have to do the background. It would be the other agency who actually employs that officer or dispatcher. They'd be responsible for conducting the background. So that's what contracting agencies are. Now, I get a question once in a while, what if I have an officer that works at multiple departments? Does Post have any concern there? And the answer is no. Post has no issue with employment at multiple agencies, just as long as each agency has done their respective background investigation. So again, Post has no dog in that fight, just as long as the agencies know that that's going on and that each agency has done their background investigation. Okay, interim chiefs. First off, the difference between interim and acting. Now, interim chief is that person who is usually hired from outside the agency, usually on a contracted basis for 6 months or 1 year. The acting chief is usually that from within inside the agency, usually a manager who's being appointed by the city manager or the city council, usually a lieutenant or captain, who's going to assume that role until that agency can either appoint or hire a new chief. Now, the reason that I bring this up is that Post, a little bit ago, enacted some update policies, if you will, for hiring interim chiefs. There are, if you don't know, there are those who go on what I could possibly call like a circuit, those chiefs who make themselves available to act as interim chiefs. They're usually retired chiefs who spent a career with a certain department. They retire and then they want to kind of still stay in the game, and they offer those services for 6 months to a year until that agency can hire a new chief. Well, Post has an interim chief policy, if you will. So for more information, I would have you refer to the interim chief of police manual, which can be found on the publication site on Post's website. But here's what you need to know, is that if a background investigation has been conducted on that interim chief candidate in the last 5 years, if they have served as an interim chief within the last 24 months, and if that initial background that was done for his previous agency was deemed compliant by Post, that is, if a regional consultant has gone over that background and has said, yes, it's a good background file, then what you can do is you can always contact that previous employing agency, ask them if you can have a copy of that chief's background file. And if so, then you as a background investigator only have to now conduct an update investigation, as we talked about before. So that's going to help shorten some steps. Again, it'd be a new PHS, new DMV, new credit check, new live scan, and then the medical and the psych. So that's one step that Post has provided for those for interim chiefs. Okay, and again, like I said, for more background information, just refer to the interim chiefs manual on the Post website under publications.
Marty, really quick before we jump ahead.
Sure.
One of the questions was regarding level 1 reserves. Do the hours have to be in a particular field, or can it be mixed? For example, patrol, investigations, etc.
No, it's not specific in their duties. Just as long as they're acting as a level 1 reserve, averaging 16 hours a month is the only concern. So, okay, status changes. Do background or updates have to be conducted for status change? Now, a status change is within that department. So a classic example is a reserve officer going to full-time status. Is a background investigation needed or update? No, it is not. The key here is as long as they are continuously employed. That's the key phrase there. So as long as that reserve officer is continuously employed with your agency and they get moved up from reserve to regular, nothing needs to be done. Same thing from reserve level 2 as an example to reserve level 1. Again, as long as they are continuously employed, no investigation needs to be done. Now, the classic one is jail deputy. Now, jail deputies, for those sheriff's departments who have jail deputies, 830.1 paren C, the classic jail deputy as defined by the penal code. Now, as long as their background investigation was done as it was for a full-time peace officer, and they're continuously employed, no update needs to be done, no new background has to be done, okay? However, if the background investigation wasn't done as if though they were a peace officer, then a background is going to have to be conducted, okay? So again, I like to encourage my sheriff's departments who have jail deputies that when they're going through the background process and they're hiring, let's say, a batch of jail deputies and a batch of full-time deputies, I encourage them to conduct that background investigation as they would for a full-time peace officer. So when it comes time to bump them up from jail deputy to full-time deputy, as long as they were continuously employed, nothing has to be done. They're just going from a status change. No background needs to be done, no update. Okay, now for dispatcher though, that's a whole different case. Now, if you have a dispatcher who wants to be a peace officer or a reserve, then a full, complete background investigation has to be done because dispatcher is a whole separate job class and it's not an update here. What happens is that when you're out in the field and you're interviewing either references, former employees, coworkers, neighbors, and you go out on the street and you're talking to these people and you say, hey, look, I'm conducting a background investigation on a dispatcher, that person will think, dispatcher, yeah, no problem. This person could be a dispatcher, no sweat. However, when you go back in the field and now you ask them the question of, hey, could this person, I'm doing background on a peace officer, then that whole dynamic, there's a whole dynamic shift. People have a tendency to, well, no tendency, they do. They hold peace officers to a higher status. So therefore, that being the case, a dispatcher is a whole different job title, whole different job classification. So when they are going from dispatcher to peace officer, a full background has to be done. Okay, so this can be a little bit confusing to try to explain as best I can. And the reason that I bring this up is that this could be a helper to the background investigator to either continue on with the investigation or to possibly halt the investigation until certain qualifications are met here. And this is the 3-year rule. So if you don't know, a person who graduates to the regular basic course, the academy, they have 3 years to obtain a job, initial qualifying service appointment, which means a full-time peace officer position. They have 3 years from the time they graduate to become a level 1 reserve or a full-time peace officer. If they don't, then they're going to have to go to the requal course, okay? Or if a person leaves an agency, let's say they work for a PD, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, they leave and it's been more than 3 years since they've worked as a peace officer, then they also need to go to the requalifying course before they can be considered. So the reason that we bring this up is that you would want to ask that question up front, especially if it's somebody who is just out of the academy and you want to find out, okay, when did you graduate from the basic academy? Well, I graduated 4 years ago. Well, what you can do is tell them a couple things. I'm going to get to the 6-year rule in a second. You can tell them, okay, before we move forward here, we need to ensure that whether you need to take the requal course or not, or for an applicant who was a peace officer, it's been more than 3 years, you're going to want to ask them this question up front. So this can help save some energy on your part, that if you establish this answer right from the get-go, you won't have to continue on through investigation only to find out later that, oh, this person needs to go to the requal course, okay? So as you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, qualifying service. Again, qualifying service for a level 1 reserve is 16 hours per month. Qualifying service for full-time peace officers if they graduate from the regular basic course or the special investigators basic course, okay? So that's the 3-year rule. Now, that's the 3-year rule there. So I want to move on to the 6-year rule. So now the 6-year rule says that when an individual completes the RBC or the basic academy and they don't get a job as a module 3, or I'm sorry, level 2 or a level 1 reserve, especially level 1 or full-time officer, they've got 6 years to take the requal course, okay? So if the time they graduate from the basic academy, they've never been employed, they have a 6-year window to take the requal course. If after 6 years, they don't take the requal course, they've got to go back and repeat the academy. So even if they wait until the 5th year, 11th month, and they take the requal course, they don't have 3 more years from that point. They only have 1 more month because they have just 6 years to get a job. So again, where this comes up or comes into play is for you as a background investigator to ask this question right away and to ensure that they have met this 3-year or 6-year rule. I'm going to pause here for a second in case there's any questions on that.
Almost did it. Almost made the Zoom error. A few questions coming in, but I think you've covered
okay.
everything. Hold on. We just had one come in from Gene.
Sure.
If we're looking at hiring an academy graduate who graduated in 2019, will he or she need to attend a refresher course?
No, again, they have 3 years. So let's say it was December of 2019. They now have until December of 2022? Is that correct? My math right? 3 years from the date of their graduation to get a job. Now, also, remember that 6-year rule. If they never get employed, they can take the requal course. So after that 3-year time, it's a 6-year window to take the requal course. Okay, so they can only take that requal course one time. Andrew, anything else on that? Okay. So one of the things I'd like to recommend on this is in your application process, I would like to encourage the agencies to require that applicants turn in their post profiles to you. That is a document that every person has been trained through post. They can obtain a copy of their post profile, and they can provide that to you when they come in for applying for a position. This way you can look at it straight up front and find out when the last time they graduated from the academy. This way, again, it's going to save you some time. So now there's also a way for you as an investigator to go through and request it. There is a form on the post website under forms for a public request of the post profile. It has to have the signature of your applicant, so that this way you can submit that. But a workaround is just to have the applicant present it to you, and you're requesting it from his permission to do so. So that's one way to hopefully prevent you from doing any extra work unnecessarily so.
Marty, do you know off the top of your head, we did get a question about if there's a 6-year cap on a basic course waiver. Does that depend on whether or not there's qualifying employment? Or is it just a hard 6-year cap?
Well, okay, the waiver is a whole different ballgame. The waiver is for those who are out of state. They were peace officers from out of state, and they've gone through the basic course waiver process. And from the time they obtain the waiver, they've got 3 years to get a job. If they don't, then they too need to go to the requal course. Okay, so that's the waiver. Okay, so I put this up here. So I talked about the 3 and the 6 years. So I asked the question, whose job is it within the agency to determine if the applicant meets the reserve training requirement or that 3-year, 6-year window? If you don't take part in that personnel process and you do find that they have extended that 3 or 6-year window, I would encourage you to be part of that process. So again, you're not given an assignment where you know the outcome is going to be, well, we can't hire this person because they don't qualify. So if you're not already been part of that process, I would encourage you to talk to your agency about this, your agency personnel head who oversees your position, who makes that hiring decision, to be part of that decision. So that's why I put this up here. Just a reminder that, again, this could be a time saver for you in the long run.
So Marty, we're getting a number of questions coming around this. So if we can
Sure.
pause there,
Yeah.
maybe I can start going through some of these questions because I'm not going to be able to
Sure.
keep up with typing the responses. So they're sort of specific, questions. They may be able to be grouped together. So one is, an academy graduate gets hired from an agency and released from the agency. However, it's been 4 years since his release. Does he have to take the requalification course or retake the academy? That's from
got to take,
Jesus.
Yeah. Got to retake the requal course. Again, it's that 3-year window. So it's either 3 years from graduation from the academy or 3 years from their last time they worked as a peace officer, for either a level 1 or a full-time peace officer. Okay.
Another question from Vince. If a level 2 reserve meets the requirements to be appointed to full-time after completing the full academy, what does HR need from post to streamline the process? Not sure if I understand that question.
No, I'm sorry. I don't understand that either.
Vince, are you on the line? Can you explain that a little bit better? Vince? All right, we'll come back to that. Question from Evelyn. Hiring a jailer who graduated from the police academy in 2019, can they also work as a reserve officer in case he later wants to apply as an officer and not attend an academy again? So I think that question is, can you be both a jailer and a reserve at the same time?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, so in the jail deputy sense here, remember this is 830.1 parentheses, there are 33 sheriff's departments in the state who can employ jail deputies. Now, jail deputy has a special exemption. They have 5 years from the time they graduate from the basic academy to be appointed as a full-time peace officer, okay? 5 years. So to answer your question though, they would have to be appointed as a level 1 reserve. They couldn't hold both hats. It's either going to be either one or the other. So if you're concerned about the clock issue, as far as 3 years, appoint him as a level 1 reserve. That's something that your department's going to have to make that choice on.
Okay. A question from Ruben. We had an applicant that was in the hiring process when his academy cert expired. Is there an exception?
Okay. We talked about this on the Ask post. The academy certification is just that. It's just proof that this person graduated from the basic course. Has nothing to do with the basic certificate or not. So in order to fulfill this 3-year window, if you will, they have to be a successful academy graduate. Because if they're not, then they're not eligible to become a level 1 or full-time peace officer. In order to be eligible for a full-time peace officer, level 1 peace officer, they have to have completed successfully the full basic academy. So if they have not, then it's a moot point. They're not eligible.
Okay. Manuel Rodriguez asked, so would it be wise to take the requalification course before the 6 years elapse to buy time, or would it not matter if this is done since the person was not hired within the allotted time frame?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is that they can take a person who graduated from the academy and never gets appointed as a peace officer at level 1. They've got that 6-year window, right? So it doesn't really matter when they hit. Like I said before in my last example, if they take it at the 5th year, 11th month, it doesn't give them 3 more years. It just gives them 1 more month, because they have to be appointed as a full-time peace officer or level 1 reserve within that 6-year window. I'm sorry, yeah, within that 6-year, to take the requal course is what I'm trying to say. So once they take the requal course, they only have until that 6-year window. This could be a little bit confusing, and I apologize. I'm trying to make it as easy as I can. But the thing to know, again, to try to keep it simple, is that they've got 6 years. From the time they graduate from the academy, they got 6 years to take the requal course, okay? It's not 6 years to get a job. It's 6 years to take the requal course, all right? So when they graduate from the academy, they have to get a job within 3 years. If they don't, they've got to take the requalification course, okay? But if they wait until that 5th year, 11th month, they can take the requal course, but it's only going to give them 1 month to get a job. I'm hoping that makes sense. So,
yeah, as I learn about this, it seems like one of the issues is whether or not they had qualifying employment since graduating from the academy. That seems to be a distinction.
Yeah, again, the qualifying employment is either a level 1 reserve or full-time peace officer. I just need to ensure that if they get a job within 3 years out of the academy. Okay, so let's back up one. Let's say they get a job, they get appointed as a level 1 reserve or a full-time peace officer, and they work 1 day and they quit. They are now eligible for the rest of their life to take the requal course, okay? They work as a peace officer 1 day and 1 day only. They can now take in perpetuity every 3 years the requal course, okay? So don't mix up that qualifying service. Qualifying service just means that they have to graduate from the academy or the SIBC, or as a level 1 reserve, they just have to maintain 16 hours of service. So the level 1 reserve is more for the background process and just ensuring they're maintaining that 16 hours of average work.
All right, I think Jay Triplett's got a little easier one for us. Basic course waivers apply to former military personnel?
No, that's not correct. Basic course waiver are for only those out-of-state peace officers who are peace officers who want to come to California to be a California officer. That's a whole different process. That's not part of this background process. The basic course waiver is a multi-step process that we have people at post who review. It's a whole application process where an applicant submits their training from the state from where they got that training, and it's reviewed by post personnel to ensure that it's compatible with post and California requirements. So the basic course waiver, that's a whole different ball game.
All right, we had another question on the time period I think we've kind of beat that to death. If we didn't address your question, hit us up after the presentation.
Yeah, please.
In many circumstances, this is sort of case by case. It depends on what your specific circumstances are, when they graduated, whether or not they have qualifying employment, how much time has gone by, what their position they're being appointed to, what position they're coming from. So it may be a little bit easier to do on a case by case.
Exactly. And there's 10 of us. There's 10 post-regional consultants. We're more than happy to help you out. We'd rather answer your questions by way of telephone or email rather than you appoint this person incorrectly. So if there are questions about this, give us a call. This can be tricky, and I throw it in here, and I always get questions, but I would rather have you guys know about it than not know about it. So it always causes questions every time I put this course on without fail. I don't know of a more simpler way to do it, but it is in the post-commission regulations. It can provide a background for you there as well. So, okay, moving on.
I think we can move on.
Yeah, right. So available resources. I just put this tab up here for you as a background investigator, just to be aware of, if you're not already, that we got the background investigator's manual, which is a great document. It really is. Everything that I'm telling you today and more so is in that manual. Every question that you could possibly have regarding the process is there. There's also the post-medical screening manual that gives you the these and nows on what to look for as far as the medical process. Also, Post communicates with its agencies and its officers by way of Post email alerts and newsletters and bulletins. This is how we as an agency advise you. And so if you have not already signed up for this, I would encourage you to go to the Post website, and I'm going to go to it right now and show you. That's a screenshot of it. The Post website, and right here, if you go into the search engine, which is this magnifying glass, and in there you just type in email, you're going to get this response back. And here you put your email address in, and you can choose as to what type of things you'd like to receive from Post. And so I would encourage you to do that. That's how we communicate with our agency. We're going to get all the bulletins on backgrounds and everything. So I just want to point that out to you. This also is another resource for you. This is a list of forms that's in the background investigator's manual. It has checklists, it has cover letters, it has employment, reference, neighbor questionnaire forms that you can use. Again, just another resource that's available to you. Okay, so this is where I get a chance to get on my soapbox. So please bear with me a little. I'll try to make this quick. Post provides to its agencies, although not for free, they're a set of background file tabs. If you're not aware of them, it's their letters A through O, and it mimics the whole post background process, from the narrative to the personal history statement to the DOJ checks, the DMV checks, the neighborhood checks. It's a series of tabs that separates all that material. And in addition to that, on the tab itself, it has what's required by either Post or the California Government Code. And it also covers those common errors that we see and how to work around those. It'll talk about, hey, don't do this because this is not what's required. Here is what's required. It's a great way of organizing the file. It's great for not only the investigator when they're comprising the file, but also for the hiring authority, be it your chief or your sheriff, whoever makes that decision, whoever reads that file. It makes it easier for them to find that content more quickly and more easily as well. And like I said, it defines the requirement. Now there's tabs for peace officers, there's tabs for dispatchers. Post peace officers are blue, dispatchers are green. They're $4.75 a set. It's just the price of cost of doing business. They're recyclable as well. So as you notice there on that second bullet point, as soon as your post-regional consultant comes through and reviews the background file, you can always remove the tabs and now use them for the next file. So they're great. Selfishly, they're great for us as regional consultants. It helps us find the material quicker instead of having to rifle through a whole file that isn't broken up into tabs. Again, we like to preach it back to you, or reach it back to you, that it helps you learn and find out what's required. It tells you exactly what's there. So that's my talk on tabs. If you don't currently use them, we really encourage you to buy sets of them. Again, like I said, they can be recycled. And it always provides the most up-to-date information as far as what's required as well. Okay, electronic files. This is the new emerging option for the background process. I don't see as many in my region, but I know they're more prevalent in Southern California. They've got some great advantages depending upon the vendor. The ones that I know about, not that I'm endorsing here, but I know about Vanguard, I know about ESOF. I've had a chance to work with both, and they're both good. They help the background investigator can complete the whole process. It's a whole series of things that they can provide. It's great for record keeping as well. The disadvantages are the cost. If you're not familiar, most of these agencies or providers charge a per user fee. And not only that, when we as post-regional consultants come in, you also have to provide a user option for we as your compliance investigator as well. So not only do they charge a fee for your own staff, but they do charge for post to access it. So that's a disadvantage. However, the thing I want to point out is that if your agency is considering going with an electronic file, if you could call your regional consultant, our bureau chief has asked us to have you work with him so that he can let you know what sort of requirements we're looking for. There are certain things when we first started working with ESOF and Vanguard, certain things that they asked us our opinion on and things that we offer to help make that process easier. And so if you are thinking about going that route, please just give us a call so that we can dialogue with you to exchange information, let you know how it can work best for the both of us. Okay, so legal issues. At Post, we try to stay out of the legal advice business. It only can cause more problems. So whenever you call up and ask us, hey, Marta, we've got a legal issue, what do you think? My first return is, hey, I'm going to need to refer you to either your city or your county council. It's not that we're afraid to make a decision or afraid to give our opinions, but whatever we say as regional consultants is God's gospel, it's law, it came from Post. So if you're asking me, hey, Marty, what do you think? And I give you my opinion, it's not, hey, it's what Marty thought, it's what Post said. So we have to be very careful on how we give you information, how we respond to your questions. So anything in the background process that's going to be under EEOC guidelines, we're going to more than likely, probably 9.5 times out of 10, refer you to your legal counsel. So just want you to be wary of that. One thing that pops up, I probably should have broken that a little bit better, as far as being wary of writing notes along the margin. Something to watch out for when you're doing your background investigation. I see frequently when I'm going through the file, I'll see a PHS and it's all marked up with notes all over the place. In the margin, there's highlights, there's sticky notes, and they're usually calling into question something of concern by you as the investigator that you want the hiring authority to see. I wanted to encourage you to not use that process. And the reason being is this, is that if you as an investigator have questions as to this person's applicability, if you will, just think how much more that's going to come into question in the event that that officer or dispatcher does something wrong, you guys get sued, and that PHS and that whole file is obtained through discovery, and the attorney says, hey, chief or sheriff, your own background investigator had questions as to this person's hireability, but yet you hired them. So what I encourage you to do is to make a working copy, if you don't already, of the PHS, and to keep a clean virgin copy for the file. And your working copy, you can make notes all over it. And this way, that's your working copy. So the question I get is, well, what should I do with that working copy when I'm done? Well, I would encourage you just to destroy it. It's your working copy. This way, there's nothing can be found, nothing can be called into question. It's your copy to get through that whole process. And this way, it's clean. Just some recommendations there, some advice. Post guidance, I just put that there so that you'll know where to look for questions on the hiring process. Just a reminder, Commission Regulation 1950 through 55 for peace officers, 1956 through 60 for dispatchers, and the government code sections are there. So again, this is just some information and areas and avenues for you to find in a resource material. Okay, this one here, kind of interesting topic. I've received phone calls about this as far as hey, Marty, when is it proper for me to, or the agency to offer the conditional offer of employment? And what's happening lately is that because the competition is so keen to get decent peace officer applicants, what's happening is that agencies are going to an academy several weeks or just a month in, finding almost any body that's breathing, those applicants that are non-affiliated, and offering them a job right up front. Then saying, hey, I want you, you look awesome, I know nothing about you, but you look great, you stand tall, I'm gonna hire you. Matter of fact, I'm gonna give you the conditional offer of employment right now. Well, a couple things have happened there. You haven't conducted an investigation, number one. You'd have no clue as to this person's background, their work ethic, their legal background, nothing. But what you're doing is that you're tying up that applicant. Not only is it wrong, and I'm going to read you some codes as to why that is, but it's not fair to that recruit. That recruit now has removed himself from going out looking for a job. They say, hey, so-and-so PD or so-and-so Sheriff's Department just offered me a job. I got the conditional offer of employment. When I graduate, I'm good to go. They not knowing, though, they don't know the process. They're believing you as the investigator. They don't know, though, that you can come back a couple months later and say, you know what? Once the background found out that you weren't so shiny and so clean, and we're going to pull our offer. So number one, it's not fair to the recruit. Number two, let me read this to you here, is that this is from the background investigation manual. For the conditional offer of employment to be considered bona fide, that is real, employers must all relevant non-medical information that they reasonably can obtain and analyze prior to extending the conditional offer of employment, okay? Now this is from the government code, California Government Code 1031.2. Consistent with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the collection of non-medical or non-psychological information of peace officers, that's your background investigation process. The collection of non-medical or non-psychological information of peace officers may be deferred until after a conditional offer of employment is issued if the employer can demonstrate that the information could not reasonably have been collected prior to the offer, okay? So I say all that to say this, is that this could lead to a false representation by your department to that candidate. And if the applicant has any sense, they could possibly seek damages from you. Here you are, you're offering a conditional offer of employment. You haven't done your due diligence as per the background investigation manual or the California Government Code. And so you're falsely represented. So it's not good practice. It's not recommended. It can be considered possibly even illegal, if you will. I won't go down that road, but it could be. So what I want you to do is I want you to make that good faith effort to do your background investigation to as far as you can take it before offering that conditional offer of employment, and then therefore scheduling them for the medical and the psych. Now, inadvertent discoveries. So this is when you are doing a sit down with your applicant and they inadvertently and voluntarily say, oh, by the way, I have been under psychiatric care for the last 3 years because I have had tendencies to kill myself. Or I have got a medical condition that, boy, I just can't seem to shake, and I'm afraid that it might jeopardize my job. Well, kind of like a jury in a case where the judge says, hey, jury, I want you to disavow those statements, stricken from the record. Well, you can't unhear something that you've already heard, right? But you can't act on it either. You haven't offered the conditional offer of employment. I'm sorry, I should have said it up front. This is before the COA is offered, okay? So before the COE, this person makes these statements. You can't unhear this information. But what you can do is that you make notes on such and such date, applicant spontaneously uttered or volunteered the following. And if it's medically or psychologically involved, you put that information, those notes, in an envelope, you seal it, and you put it away until you come to the conclusion that you're going to make a COE. Once you make that determination, then you would turn that information over to the doctor or the psychologist so they can utilize it, because now the COE has been offered and that information can now be used either to disqualify or support or whatever that application's hiring status. So those are inadvertent discoveries. Okay. More legal issues after the COE. So medical screening can only take place again after the COE, and the medical, as far as post concern, is for, and the government code is for peace officers and dispatchers. The psychological screening is required only for peace officers. A lot of agencies do it for the dispatchers, which is fine, but it's only required for the peace officers. So the thing you need to know about psychological evaluations is this, is that POST doesn't approve, if you will, psychological evaluators. We just ensure that they are maintaining their training standards and their background standards to be considered a candidate to conduct psychological screening. So we verify that, and we provide a list of those psychological evaluators who have been approved under the hiring tab and then the agency tab on the POST website. And I'm going to show you a screen in a second what that looks like, but I want to continue here first. What you need to know is that the psychological evaluator has to have so many hours of continuing professional training in their field in order to be considered an approved, again, evaluator for POST and for the necessity of doing a psychological evaluation. Okay, and I'm going to talk of this in a couple seconds here. Optional examinations. POST has no oversight regarding voice stress analysis, polygraphs, or other reliability truthfulness methods. So I'll occasionally get a question on this, Marty, what's POST position or stance? And I put this in here just to let you know we have no oversight here. We have no opinion one way or the other. If you want to use those, fine. If not, fine as well. POST has no position on that. Okay, so as I was saying, when you go to the POST website under medical evaluators, okay, you're going to come up with this. Oops, I'm sorry.
I just linked it in the chat.
Yeah, I can't see it, unfortunately. So what I want to point out is that there's the two headers there. You're going to see the evaluator name on the left-hand side. Then when you scroll over to the right, you're going to see either yeses or nos, okay? And under that column says meet CPE or continuing professional education requirements. It's going to be either yes or no. In order for that psychological evaluator to be considered valid with POST and to conduct that psychological evaluation, it has to be yes under that column, okay? So you want to ensure that you might make this a routine process for you. Now, you as a background investigator might not be involved in this process, but I would encourage you to share this with those who might be your HR, it might be the higher up on your chain, but I would encourage you, before you send your candidates to a psychological evaluator, ensure they meet POST requirements as far as training. Again, it'll be a yes under that column, okay? So the question I possibly get is that okay? And I come across it once in a while, because when we go, we check, when we're doing our compliance reviews and we come to the psychological evaluator form, we'll pull up this list to ensure they are current. If they are not, it's as if though the psychological evaluation wasn't done at all. So if you have an evaluator who does this, who is not an approved evaluator by POST, that psychological evaluation pretty much is null and void at this point. And so what's going to have to happen? Well, another psychological evaluation is going to have to be done, but the cart is before the horse here, because now you more than likely have hired this person. So it becomes a real sticky issue. So I want to encourage you again to either, if you guys make that decision or your hiring authorities, make sure they know about this website, okay? Now, here's what's required of psychological evaluators. I want to read this to you. A psychologist who conducts peace officer evaluations per Government Code 1031, paren F, paren 2, must be licensed by the California Board of Psychology and have experience that is at least the equivalent of 5 full-time years in the diagnosis and treatment of emotional and mental disorders. The psychologist shall also have met any applicable education and training procedures set forth by POST designed for the conduct of pre-employment psychological screening of peace officers. So that's what this list is. This list is verifying that. We have people back at POST that work with the psychological evaluators who do nothing but work with the psychs and ensure they are trained. So again, not to beat a dead horse, but I don't want to see you have this become an issue during the compliance review. Okay. Cool. Andrew, any questions on that at all from the crowd?
Nope, I think we're good, sir.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. It is 10:40. Let's come back at 10:50. Okay, we're back. This is, I have to be honest, this is moving a little faster than it normally does. And I think it's only because I am not in front of a live audience and not able to interact. So this is moving a little quicker than I was anticipating. So we may be out of here even faster. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but okay. So moving on. So
Marty,
we talked about the tabs.
Marty,
I'm sorry, Andrew.
we jump in, we have one question come in on the break. Maybe you can speak to. Regarding background updates, if they're hired back within 180 days and the background was done within a year, they just want to confirm that criminal record credit check does not need to be redone. Is that correct?
That's correct. So if they come back within 180, I know that it sounds kind of funny, not 6 months, but if they are with your agency, they leave and come back within 180 days, nothing needs to be done. Outside of, you may have taken them off the DOJ FBI watch list. And what a lot of agencies do when an officer or a dispatcher retires or quits. If they were not taken off the watch list, then nothing needs to be done at all. Now, again, your chief or sheriff may require you to do an update or some kind of modified version of that, but post doesn't require anything.
And Jess likes the pace, so carry on.
Okay. Jeff, this is for you.
Jess.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we've talked about tabs. I'm not going to go into that any further, but these next several slides then, or actually the remainder of the presentation, is going to be discussing some common problems that I see and more than likely my fellow consultants see and in compliance reviews, and offer some suggestions on how to either overcome them or improve. So we've talked about the tabs. One thing though, if I can ask a selfish favor, if possible, is that when I go to an agency that doesn't use tabs, and now it's very few in my region, I've worked with them and I've convinced them that this is a great way to go for them. Again, not only for me selfishly, but more so for the agency, and almost all my agencies use tabs. However, if you're not going to use a tab, if you can at least put the documents in the order that the tabs would call for. So for instance, the first thing that I would look at would be the background narrative, then the personal history statement, then the DOJ FBI fingerprints. Then I think what's next is credit, then the local agency checks. If you can at least put them in that order, because that's the order that our review program is set up in. And also, if I can ask that, if you are using the tabs, if you can put that document that we are looking for first, right out of the gate. So I'll give you an example. Education. What we're looking for a peace officer applicant is the minimum qualification for education proof, which is the high school transcript. So if I turn the education tab, if the high school transcript can be right behind that, that'd be perfect. And then if you need to put supporting documents, let's say that your office requires or agency requires them to have college education, if you could put the college transcripts right behind that, or the diplomas and so on. So if you can put that document that we need to see as, I'm sorry, I'm losing as consultants doing our compliance check, that really helps us and helps speed along the process. And everything else that would be considered superfluous, if you will, that we don't need to see, if it can be put behind that required document. I hope that makes sense, but that's a huge, selfishly, that's a huge time saver for us. So that's it there on that area for tabs. Okay, so the narrative. The narrative is not the most common area. That's not correct. There are usually different couple styles of narratives, okay? So as my reading says there, the narrative must fully address and document all mandated areas of inquiry and contain sufficient information to allow the hiring authority to make a defensible decision. There we go again with that defensible decision. Again, the whole reason that you are putting this package together is to defend the agency's reason to hire this person as a peace officer or dispatcher. That whole file is defending that decision. So the narrative, which is going to start off your whole background packet, it's almost akin to the synopsis to a crime report. So that when you're doing your crime reports and you put in a synopsis, the DA, the deputy district attorney who's doing the screening as far as which ones are going to file, they're not looking at the whole report, they're looking at the synopsis. So the narrative is considered, in many respects, the synopsis of the background file. And it almost can be a standalone document where the hiring authority can make their decision if the narrative is done well and done correctly on this person's validity as far as either being a good candidate or not. So the narrative sets off and starts the the whole background process sets the tone, okay? So some of the problems that we see is that the narrative can be too vague. It's only bold information, but nothing with any detail, okay? And I'm gonna get into that a little further on a couple screens down. Also want to encourage you to follow the background investigator standard format, which includes all the categories, again, from the PHS to the credit check, DMV checks, and so on. Ensure that you include all those items, okay? Okay, so continuing on with the narrative. There are two different styles, and there's really no formal title, so I'm just giving them my names. I'm not trying to confuse you, but there are two different styles in narrative, and neither one are right or wrong. I just want to talk about them because I get questions on this, and I want to be able to help you through this process. So there's what I call the bullet point style or the post format. Okay, that's where you have the cover page, which is awesome. I always encourage using that cover page. It's where you identify the applicant, where they're from, kind of gives their bio, if you will. So that's the bullet point or post format, and I'm going to show you examples of those as I move on, where you provide basic information in the narrative, and then behind each successive tab is the meat of the report, if you will. So if I were to turn to the relatives and references, I would find all those relatives and references identified and what they had to say. When I go to the employment section, it'd be all former employers, either supervisors or coworkers, and then all the information or meat would be there. Or there's what I call the outline style. That's includes all of the meat, if you will, on all of the main points. So if I were going through the narrative and I came to the topic of employers, I would see the job that the applicant last worked at. Let's say it's Home Depot. Home Depot from January 1st to December 31st. And then you're going to identify the supervisor. Supervisor so-and-so said. Then the coworkers. So what you're going to do is you're going to include all the meat, if you will, in the narrative under each header. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second. Again, there's neither style is right or wrong, but I get questions, Marty, what do you recommend? So I'm going to show them to you and then give you a recommendation, okay? So here's the classic header or the bio page that begins out the narrative. And there's nothing wrong with this page. I encourage you to use this. And they have these are taken right from the background investigator's manual, this sample here. So I encourage you to have this as your cover page to your report, if you will, in the narrative section, okay? That's cut and dry. Here is what I call, again, the post style or the bullet point style. As you'll see that, let's see if I can get this to work for me now. Under the relatives and references, it's just generic information. There's no names of individuals. There's no statements. There's no quoted statements. It's just giving an overall, hey, talk to the relatives, talk to references and acquaintances, all had good things to say, and it ends. Then it moves to the next topic, education, residences, employment, and so on, okay? So that's the post or the bullet style, if you will. And again, nothing wrong with that, all right? Here's what I call the narrative style, okay? So what you would do instead of the bullet style, when you come to the topic of, in this case here, under experience employment, again, you would put employer. So his most recent or her most recent employer, start from the most recent to the least. State University Police, employed from January 1st to present. The supervisor, okay, so on such and such day, I made contact with the supervisor, Sergeant Tim Wallace, who said the following in summary. And you provide a couple paragraphs on what this former supervisor said. Then you go to coworker, identify the coworker, and here's the coworker said, right? What we're looking for as far as compliance reviews and as consultants is we're looking for, again, enough information to support what this person's work history, like in this case, we're looking at experience employment. We're looking to see if this person's work history is like. Do they have a good work ethic? Were they on time? Did they do a good job? So this narrative style, I think, up front provides that information to the hiring authority. It's all right there, okay? So again, either style is fine, all right? But what I encourage you to do is that to bold the names so that the person who's reading the file can see easily what that reference was saying. As you notice here, I highlighted Sergeant Tim Wallace, and every time I mention Wallace's name, I bold his name so it can be seen easily. than the next coworker. So we're looking for the question is, well, Marty, how many different jobs do we need to contact? Well, we're looking for, again, a way to establish a pattern as to this person's work history. So if they work for a single job for 10 years, you're going to be somewhat limited, right? But if they had multiple jobs over 10 years, we want you to go and try and make contact with those past employers and coworkers. Matter of fact, you're more than likely going to get better information from a coworker than a supervisor, because a coworker is working side by side with him every day. A supervisor may be held to only giving a guarded response because of the company policy. They can't give too much information for fear of being sued or whatever. So you're going to more than likely get better responses from coworkers. So I always encourage my agencies to focus more on coworkers and supervisors, but don't discount a supervisor. It's good information, okay? So that's one thing. Let me take this off. All right, so this is another example under residences and neighborhood checks, okay? So again, this is all still part of the narrative. It's not behind the tabs, behind the narrative. And now when it comes to residence and neighborhood checks, we're identifying who the neighbor is, because that's required. Have to identify who they are by name and provide their address. Again, it's a summary as to what they told you as an investigator, okay? Now, the next question I get on neighborhood checks, and maybe I'll save that for later. So these are the styles. Is any one style better than the other? No, it's not. But the only reason I point out what I call this outline style is that it may be a quicker read and more for the benefit of the hiring authority to read this style, because it's summarizing in the narrative all those bullet points or all those points of information that they can find behind each tab. Is that going to make it wrong to use the bullet point style? No, it's not. But again, I just want to be able to point this out to you that there are multiple styles available on the narrative. Neither one is right or wrong. Andrew, any questions on that at all?
Not about that. We do have a question about the 180 days separation and medical leave.
Okay.
So we'll come back to that at the end,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Okay, that'd be great. Okay, so common problems on the PHS. The most common problem is, and let me go back first, the post-personal history statement is not required to be used. It is not. If you have your own agency PHS, that's fine, no problem at all. However, personally, I would encourage you to use post-PHS, and here's why. Post is always ensuring that all the questions that are being asked are those questions that can be legally asked by the applicant, of the applicant. Post is always going through this and vetting the PHS to ensure that it is current. It has the most recent employment laws included, and you don't have to worry that if you use post personal history statement, if anything ever comes into question, Post will always help defend you in utilizing that statement. Let's say you guys get sued, Post will always defend the use of its PHS in your background process. Now, the most recent version is February of 2018. A common problem, quote unquote, would be using older PHSs. So if you are using Posts, again, I would encourage you to use the most recent version. You can find that online. Again, the most recent is February 2018. Now, if you do use your own agency version, and a couple of my agencies do, thing you have to know as a couple is that Post will not defend your own agency version in the event that you, again, possibly get sued. We're only going to defend Posts. You may ask questions in there that may not be allowed by the most current employment laws. So there are some disadvantages. Now, there is a workaround for you, and that's using the unprotected version. If you'll see in the bottom of my screen, the unprotected version of Post PHS. You can obtain that by going to web request at post.ca.gov. This allows you to use the footprint of Post PHS, but allows you to customize it as well. However, just a heads up there that if you do use the unprotected version, again, Post will not protect you on that because we don't know what has been amended or not. But it is a way of using the Post outline of the PHS, but again, adding or subtracting questions you want to ask of the applicant.
Marty, before we get too far along, we have a question I think more relevant for the previous section. Anthony asked, does Post prefer the narrative section for each subheading behind the tab for that section, or should the entire narrative be at the front? then only the supporting documents behind the tab.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I did forget to, I forgot to cover that, sorry. So if you use that outline style that I was talking about, where it's more narrative in the upfront narrative, then if you go behind each tab, nothing has to be there because all the information is provided in the narrative using that outline style. However, if you use that bullet style, okay, the bullet or the post style where you're only providing just brief information, then you do have to provide the meat of that information behind each tab, okay? Hopefully that made sense. And again, I'm not endorsing one or the other, I'm just giving you options. I think that in my personal opinion, that the outline style is better for the reasons that I stated, but there's no right or wrong, just as long as you're providing information one way or the other. Okay, so common problems under fingerprint returns. Number one is that you want to ensure you get all, for peace officers, that you get all 3 fingerprint returns. You get the DOJ fingerprint, FBI fingerprint, and the DOJ firearms clearance letter, okay? The clearance letter is not required for dispatchers. Sometimes we will see they will return as CCWs, not for peace officers. That's actually a fairly common error, that the fingerprint return was run for a CCW. It has to be run for a peace officer applicant or for a dispatcher applicant. Just ensure that whoever enters that information in the live scan is entering it properly. That's a fairly common error. So again, just ensure that it is for a peace officer. And then mistaking the fact of delay notification is the return. It is not. It's just that. Again, it has to be a full, complete return on a peace officer applicant or dispatcher applicant. Okay, so those are the most common on fingerprints. And the other thing too is that one is missing. I'll go do a compliance review and the FBI and the DOJ fingerprints are there for a peace officer applicant, but the DOJ firearms clearance letter is not. So again, just ensure you have all 3 for a peace officer, just 2 for a dispatcher. Okay, driving history. It's not an official document. It has to be a document from the DMV and or CLETS NCIC. So what we encourage the agencies to do is the hiring departments can require candidates to provide an official DMV printout of their driving history. Candidates can request this official driving record by completing and mailing the DMV form INF 1125 or taken directly to the DMV field office. So that's the ideal. Agencies can run the DMV checks if that's their prerogative, but we encourage to get the full printout and to have the applicant go and get that for you.
Marty, do you prefer the embossed certified document from Sacramento or the printout from a local DMV office?
Either. I'm not particular on that, just as long as it's the legal document, legal return from DMV and or, like I said, CLETS NCIC. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, local law enforcement agency checks. What we're looking for here is an actual copy of a letter. It has to be a letter. If you read the tab, it'll tell you that'll reinforce that, sent out to the agency, okay? The ideal is to have that letter returned and in the file with a stamp usually from that agency saying no record found. So that's the ideal. If nothing else, at least a copy of the letter that you sent to the agency, which proves that you did your due diligence in contacting that agency where the applicant lives, works, or frequents. Those are the 3 areas that you want to send. So any place where they lived, any place where they worked, and where they frequent is where you're going to want to send that letter. So for instance, Sacramento County. So I would send it to the Sheriff's Department, SAC PD, Folsom PD, Galt PD. I would send it to all the local agencies. And then don't forget CHP. Sometimes local law enforcement agencies will not do a check on the driving history of that applicant and may overlook what their driving history may be. So don't forget to run the local CHP as well. This way you'll know that you're getting a printout or return on their driving history.
Marty, we had a DMV driving question again.
Sure.
Have you had anybody use the DMV kiosk, and will that suffice?
I'm not familiar with that. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with the kiosk.
All right, thank you.
Now, don't forget that you send these to out of states as well. So if your candidate is a currently California residing candidate applicant, and they may have lived at other agencies, don't forget to focus on their other agencies as well. You want to get as many returns as possible. Okay, so again, what we're looking for is that actual letter. We don't need to see copies of crime reports. We don't need to see copies of NCIC runs. We don't need to see DMV traffic collision reports, all that we're looking for, now your agency may require more, but all that we're looking for is that agency letter that shows that you contacted them, and then the ideal is the return showing that they responded, okay? Credit reports, it has to be from one of the three bona fide credit reporting agencies, either Equifax, TransUnion, or Experian, okay? It has to be. It cannot be from Credit Karma. It cannot be from any of the other private credit agencies out there. Oh, I'm getting an error message on my computer. Let me just plug in real fast. Excuse me, I'm sorry. It has to be from one of the bona fide credit reporting agencies. So ensure that it is. Now, one thing you want to ensure of is that it cannot be anything more than 1 year old from the time of appointment. So let's say that the person gets appointed June 1st of 2020. You can go back 1 year. It can't be anything older than June 1st of 2019. So ensure that all of your legal documents, that's the DOJ, I forgot to mention this, your DOJ, FBI, your credit checks, the DMV checks, they cannot be anything more than 1 year old. So ensure that. So for the credit agency, same thing. Now, I come across this frequently as well, as that I see a very well done and documented credit report. I see the data was pulled, but I don't see the applicant's name on it anywhere. So therefore, I can't associate it to that candidate. And usually what happens is that there is a cover page or a title page that comes with the credit report, and agencies don't include that, and therefore their name is not mentioned anyplace else in that document. I have to be able to confirm that this report is tied to the applicant. So if it doesn't have their name on it, it's not a bona fide report, and therefore it is now identified as missing in my review. So ensure that you do that with your credit reports. Education. Okay, so first of all, what we're looking for, when I say we as post research consultants, we're looking for that proof that shows that they have completed the education requirement. Education requirement for peace officers is the completion or the equivalent of a high school diploma. Okay, it has to be a completed high school diploma or equivalency, all right? So the proof of that and what we're looking for are high school transcripts, all right? High school transcripts. Now, if it is a public high school, you can be assured that it is an accredited agency or educational institution. If not, check with the California Department of Education's website to run a check on that school. You can always call that school as well, that high school, to confirm who are you accredited, and if so, who through, and then you can pull up that accredited agency to find that school to confirm it. But if it is a public high school in the United States, you can be assured that it is an accredited school, okay? So going back to what we're looking for transcripts, and on that transcript, it has to show that they graduated. There has to be a graduation date on those transcripts. Or if you're using the equivalent, let's say the GED or high school equivalency, it has to show that they have passed all the requirement on the transcripts, okay? But it has to show in the transcripts that they graduated. And what I will see frequently are transcripts from people who have attended high school, but either they have moved and they didn't provide the high school transcripts from where they completed high school, or they dropped out and the hiring agency doesn't know to look for it that they completed it. It has to say on the transcript, graduated and a date. So just ensure that you see graduated, okay? Now, for those who have college degrees, college trumps the high school requirement, okay? It trumps it. It's higher than, so therefore, if they are a college graduate, it trumps it. Now, for proof of that, it has to be a completed college degree. It cannot be just some college. So therefore, it has to be a completed associate degree or a completed bachelor's degree or even master's or doctorate, okay? It cannot just be some college credit. And I will see that frequently where the agency is providing the education transcripts or the college transcripts, but there's no completed degree, and they're using that in place of the high school. And if it's not a completed college degree, either associate or bachelor's, therefore it's missing. It's not a proof of the education, okay? Digital transcripts. More and more schools are utilizing digital transcripts. The best way to verify those is just to contact the college itself or the company that issued. There's actually private companies now that are issuing college transcripts. Just contact them to see what they can give you to confirm that there is a legitimate transcript that you are getting for that applicant, okay? There was something else I was going to say about education. Oh, does anybody know the educational requirement of a dispatcher? Any responses?
Nothing in the chat yet. I think you
Okay.
stumped them. Oh, high school?
Okay, actually, it's a trick question. There is none. There is no educational requirement for a dispatcher candidate. Either issue or character confirming a stat, if you will, for lack of a better. So if they say that they didn't graduate from high school, they're not eliminated from that. But if they got a high school degree, you need to see their high school transcripts. If they tell you they completed a college degree, you need to see their college transcripts. So there is no educational requirement for a dispatcher. Okay, citizenship. Oh, let me go back. One thing. If an applicant can't produce the high school transcript as proof that they have fulfilled the education requirement, then at minimum, they're going to have to go and take the GED or the equivalent. They're going to have to actually go take the test because either they've lost them or there's no proof of it, or they can't remember, whatever the case would be. If they cannot provide educational proof or proof that they've completed the education requirement, then they're going to actually have to go and take the GED. So that's come across, found that a couple times where they could not provide proof. And I don't recall the reasons as to why. Either they didn't complete high school thinking that they did, years later, they go to get their transcripts and it doesn't show they graduated, or whatever the case may be. But if they didn't complete, then they're going to have to go and take the GED. And then proof of that is going to be the GED transcripts or high school equivalency transcripts. Okay, citizenship. What we're looking for and the only acceptable are things.
Marty, can I interrupt you really quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
A question came in while we were still talking about transcripts. Are technical schools approved, like Institute of Technology or National Career Education? Do you have any experience?
As long as they are an accredited school that's going to prove that they've completed the education requirement for high school, they can be. So I have seen adult schools that do, yes. You're just going to have to contact the school and say, are you affirming or testing this person has completed the high school education requirement in the state of California? You just want to confirm that with them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, citizenship. What we're looking for is a government-issued birth certificate, not the ceremonial, which is usually from a hospital. Need to see a government-issued birth certificate, okay? Now, you can provide the original, and if it is the original, it has to have the stamp, raised stamp on it, or you can make a copy of it. If you make a copy of any original document, you need to ensure that you put somewhere on that copy that the original has been verified with your name, initials, and a date. So it's just original verified with your date, with the date and name, okay? So going back to the birth certificate, it has to be a government issue. Now, abstract, if you look at that third bullet point there, we cannot take abstract birth certificates. An abstract, and it actually says it right on it. They're usually smaller in physical size. They usually are about the size of like a 4x6 or maybe a little bit bigger than that, but it's actually a smaller document. And it actually says abstract. An abstract is an abbreviated or an abridged version of a birth certificate. It usually doesn't include the birth parents on there. We cannot accept abstract of birth certificates. So if you get one, like I said, it will say on it, it will say this abstract birth certificate, it's not acceptable. Make them go back to their county registrar, county recorder rather, and get a copy of the birth certificate, okay? Another proof of citizenship is the US passport. If you're going to make copies of that, which again, we're going to need to see as proof, please make a copy of the outside of the book as well as the inside that shows their picture and their name identifying information. So take a copy of both, okay? US passports come in different colors. There's blue, brown, black, and light green that I know of. The blue is usually the one you're going to see most often. That's an indicative of a US citizen. A brown is usually a US government employee. A black is a US diplomat, and light green of all things, it's a refugee travel document. I've never seen one of those, but it is a valid passport, and it is acceptable for proof of US citizenship, okay? Now,
how about a birth certificate from a foreign country?
No, well, none. I'm going to talk to that right now. So if they are not US citizens, then they have to go through this US citizenship process. And before they can become a peace officer applicant, they have to have initiated the US citizenship process. You cannot take an applicant who hasn't started that yet, okay? They have to come to you already initiated that process. And then the law says is that they have 3 years to complete that process. So you can appoint them as peace officers if everything checks out, background and so on, Again, as long as the process has been initiated, and they have to have completed that within 3 years. If not, they are no longer, they're considered to be not a U.S. citizen, and then therefore they cannot hold a peace officer position. So that's something you want to check. So then if they are not U.S. born, then they're going to have to provide for you as proof naturalization paperwork, okay, naturalization documents. And so it's U.S. So it shows that they become a citizen, and that's fine. You need to make a copy of that just like you would a birth certificate. Now, if you look at bullet point number 4, U.S. territories, those people from U.S. territories of Northern Marianas, the Swains Islands, or the American Samoa, they are not U.S. citizens. They're U.S. nationals. So they do not have U.S. citizenship, so they have to go through the U.S. citizenship process, even though they are residents of U.S. territories. So again, I've seen this 2 times, Northern Marianas in both instances. So again, if they're from the Northern Marianas, Swains Islands, American Samoa, they are not U.S. citizens, okay? Military registration. Anybody who was born after January 1st, 1960 has to register male for the draft, okay? So your male applicants born after January 1st, 1960 have to have proof of that. They have to have proof that they've registered for the draft, okay? That's an easy fix. If you happen to have an applicant that's completed their file, but they forget that, you can always go to selectiveservice.org. And if you have their social security number, you can always run that form for them. So if they're in the office or you need that and you're doing your file and you forgot to do that, that's an easy fix on your part. You can run that yourself. Now, if they've served in the military, male or female, we're looking for their DD-214 forms. And the form, which you'll be identified in the lower right-hand corner of that DD-214, it has to be either, and you'll see it either 2 ways. It's either say service or form, and then 2 or 4. So it's either going to say service 2 or service 4, or form 2 or form 4. It can only be those 2 forms. Otherwise, it doesn't have all the relative information that we need to see. So again, if you have a person who served the military, male or female, you have to get their DD-214. It's got to be 2 or 4, okay? Now, if your applicant fails to register for the draft after the age of 26, that's the cutoff point, please indicate in the narrative and the tab behind, in the military tab, applicant failed to register, okay? Now, there's nothing that we at Post will do. That's not, all we need to confirm is that they did register. If they didn't, that's an agency concern. I know of some agencies that will not take a male applicant because they failed to register. That's your call, but at least put it in the narrative so that I'm not looking for a DD-214 or I'm looking for their registration form. Just put down they failed to register, okay? Occasionally I'll get the question, well, Marty, what happens if they do fail to register? The one thing where it can come back to get them is that if they are applying for federal student guaranteed loans, they'll be denied. There are some other properties or other consequences, but it's an arrestable offense technically, but it's not going to happen. We're just going to really bite the candidates if they go to apply for any student assistance loan wise, they're going to get denied. But again, that is an agency specific decision on whether you want to take that or not. Employment history. The reason I put closed businesses there is that when you're doing your checks, and as I talked earlier, we'd like for you to get as many former employers and co-workers and supervisors as you can to show work history. But if you come to a closed business, don't just stop there. And I've seen this on the narrative, went to such and such business, closed, couldn't proceed any further. Don't use it as an excuse. If you can, at least try to get a hold of co-workers or even supervisors where the applicant may have given you names or contact information. Just don't stop that, oh, business is closed, I'm going to just move on. Because you can still get possibly good information, again, as to their work history, okay? The second bullet point there, and I see this, I've seen this several times, is that just to let you know as a background investigator, you have to confirm all information that you find has to be independently verified. So if you happen to go to another agency, let's say you're doing a lateral candidate, and you go and you look at their background file, you cannot reference that agency so-and-so who did a background investigation on the candidate found from their previous employer that they had yada, yada. You can't do that. All you can do is you can take that information and then as a, hey, I need to confirm this information, you can do it, and you got to go and contact that source yourself. You cannot put in your narrative, if I'm, let's say this is Sacramento Sheriff that you work for, you put down SAC PD in their background investigation contacted the applicant's former employers, and here's what they found. You can't do that. It's got to be independently verified by you, the background investigator. You can use it as a foundational work that you need to contact these sources, but you cannot make reference to what another agency has said in their background file. Dissolution of marriage. Okay, so what's important here is that you get the actual court document, okay? And that's usually in California is going to be verified. In the upper right-hand corner, it's an empty box on the document forms. It's going to have the court stamp. Ensure that it is stamped because that proves that it is a valid official document. Also ensure that it is a dissolution of marriage document, not, and I see this frequently, a custody order or an alimony financial support document or something else. It actually has to say on the document, dissolution of marriage. It is plainly there. It's usually a checkbox that the court clerk will check. So ensure they get, and also if the person's been divorced multiple times, make certain that you get a dissolution of marriage for each marriage partner, okay? Relatives and references. Okay, so the area I'd like to encourage here is that don't necessarily stop with interviewing or contacting those relatives or references that are provided by the candidate, okay? You and I both know that the applicant more than likely is going to provide only those names who are going to be favorable in their responses to you as an agency, right? Nobody's going to list somebody who is not going to get them good information to the agency. So what I encourage you to do is utilize secondary references. So example, if I'm the background investigator, I would go to the person who is listed on the PHS and say, hey, you've given me good information, that's good stuff, but hey, who else about Marty can I talk to? Is there anybody else that you would recommend, friend-wise, coworker-wise, that I can talk to? That's your secondary reference. And the secondary reference is more than likely going to give you a non-biased and a non-filtered response, which is a great resource, okay? Not saying to discount those persons listed on the PHS. Please do speak with them, but don't only stop there. Go to the secondary references.
Marty.
So really, don't
Marty.
Yes.
Really quick before we move
Sure.
on. Question regarding marriage certificates. Do you need a marriage certificate for dissolved marriage?
No. That is one thing you do not need. So as I was saying earlier, when I'm only provide for me that document you need to see. When it comes to marriages, I don't need to see marriage certificates. Only if they've been divorced, I need to see dissolution of marriage. We do not need to see marriage certificates. Now, your agency may require it, but we don't need to see it. Okay. Going back to references and family, please don't focus only on family references. Again, they're more than likely only going to give you favorable responses. Just recently, I had an agency where I had to point out to them, all you're doing here is talking to mom and dad, wife, brother, sister, stepsister, sister-in-law, brother-in-law. That's not giving me a good reference. Again, it's only more likely to be favorable in the response. So please reach out and take up more than just family, okay? And the same thing for vice versa. Don't only focus on just friends, do focus on the family because they could, again, provide you a good background on that person's character, a good historical background. So don't discount the family either. Okay, neighborhood checks. This is probably the biggest area that gets overlooked time and time again without fail. And I don't know why. I have a tendency to think that neighborhood checks may be looked at as somebody who really is not going to provide good information, but they truly are the unknown observer. And they can provide good information to you as a background investigator. They can let you know that, hey, this person has got cars driving up at all hours of the night. I hear arguing constantly. I hear there's either loud parties taking place. Now, there may be good reason for all of those, but the neighbor, like I said, is an unknown observer, can provide you good information. So don't discount your neighbors, okay? Now, also, if you go and try and knock on the current neighbor's doors and you're not getting responses, either they're not going to give you information or they're not answering, don't stop at the most current neighborhood. If an applicant has lived in multiple neighborhoods over the years, right, let's say, and as long as it's relative, so within the last 3 to 5 years, they lived in a previous neighborhood, go and try knocking on those doors. Don't just stop at the current neighborhood, okay? Now, you have to get their names. It's required. If they refuse to give you your name, but they still give you some feedback, just put that in your narrative. Talk to neighbor so-and-so who lived in so-and-so address, who refuse to give their name, but they still gave you information, you can still use that, okay? But the ideal and what's required is to get their name. So again, ensure get their name and then get their information and knock on multiple doors. Now, I also see frequently on such and such date, I went and did a neighborhood canvas, I got no responses, and they leave it at that. You might have to go out multiple times. You might have to go out in the evening when they're more than likely going to be home. You might have to go out on the weekends to contact neighbors to ensure they're home. So don't just try one time. We're looking for multiple efforts if you don't get the result the first time, and we're looking for multiple neighbors. I'm looking for at least 3 neighbors. I'm looking for the names of 3 neighbors and the information they provide when I'm doing my compliance reviews.
Marty, can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess I was low volume, so I tried turning it up. Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better.
Okay.
A couple questions have come in. What if parents don't approve and give very negative review of the applicant? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Go ahead and use it. It just, I mean, all you're doing is you're a fact finder. You're not necessarily steering the narrative. So if they happen to give you a negative comment, so be it. It's going to be taken in context with everybody else's statements. So if just one person or 2 people have negative comments, don't discount that. Don't not include it. I'm sorry. Don't not include it. Include it in the narrative. Sorry.
Okay.
Do include it. Even though it's negative, it's still important.
Another question I'm not sure I entirely understand. I'll read the question as asked, and then maybe we can do some interpretation. Can you help us with neighborhood checks during COVID? I assume the question is, do we have any recommendations on how?
I understand. Sure, and I get that, and that's valid. I'll get the question, hey, Marty, do I still have to go knock on doors and do face-to-face? And the answer is no. If you don't feel comfortable, no problem. But don't forget now, we've got some new mediums. We're using one right now. We're using Zoom. There's nothing that prevents you from contacting the neighbor via Zoom conference. You've got their phone number, hopefully from your applicant. You can always call them up and say, hey, look, do you mind if we do a Zoom conference? Or while you got them on the telephone, interview them that way. There's nothing that says you've got to do it in person. Okay. That's the same thing for all of your references, coworkers, anybody that you need to interview doesn't have to be in person. It can be via telephone, can be via email, can be via US mail. Or you can even go knock on the door and back up 15 feet and talk to them from a distance if you want to. But you can't discount it. It still is required. A couple months back, about March or so, Post did send out a bulletin on how to deal with the hiring process. I would encourage you to go back and find it. I'm sorry, I don't know it by number.
I'll find it and post it in the chat.
Thank you, Andrew. But it's back around about March or April or so.
Okay. And then there was a question about whether they can take a picture of the applicant.
I don't see a problem with that. I think it's a great idea because sometimes neighbors don't know who you're referencing. So if you can show them a picture, hey, by the way, this is your neighbor if you didn't know. No, I think that's a great idea. A lot of my agencies do that. So no, there's no. Now, what I would ask the approval, if you will, of your applicant. I can't see why they would deny that, but just as a CYA, I'd probably ask them if I can, hey, do you mind if I use a likeness of yourself so for your neighbors? Okay, so references, again, I touched on this earlier, but again, what I want to point out is that I will see this every once in a while where a reference is listed as a coworker, a friend, and a neighbor. Okay, so they just happen to fulfill all 3 blocks. Do us a favor and don't use them for all 3. Use them for just one. Use them for the friend tab or the friend identifier, or use them as the neighbor source, or use them as a coworker, but don't lump them into all one. It just makes for better record keeping, better reference material, and I think it just makes for a better report. And this is most commonly seen with family members, where where your uncle, aunt, cousin lives next door, so they are a neighbor, they're a relative, and you might even work with them. So choose them for one field and go with that in that way. Okay, going back to medical. So the medical examination has to be conducted for both applicants, for both dispatcher and for peace officer. The thing that is most commonly seen in error is that it was signed by a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. The exam can be conducted by either one, but the form, the medical release form or medical suitability declaration form now as it's called, has to be signed by an MD, okay? And that MD has to provide not only their signature, but they have to provide their printed name. They have to provide their medical license number, and they had to provide their contact information, their phone number and address. And the reason that is that, as you guys most know, that a doctor's signature is chicken scratch at best. And if you ever have to, for any legal reasons, have to go back to determine who signed that applicant's medical form, and you don't have their printed name or a way of contacting them, that form is useless. So again, and if you use the post-medical suitability form, it will show right on it that they need the doctor's signature, printed name, medical license number, contact info. So that is right there, okay? Examination did not meet the guidelines. And so ensure that you're using a doctor who knows how to examine a peace officer candidate. If you want to use the post-medical examination forms for a dispatcher or for peace officer applicants, that form is available. It's online, and their applicant can take it right to the doctor so the doctor knows exactly what they have to examine. Also, ensure that it is less than one year or less from the date of appointment. Remember, it's that date of appointment going backwards 1 year. It cannot be any older than that, okay?
Marty?
Yes.
I think the bulletin you're referring to is 2020-18. I posted it in the chat, but if anybody is looking forward who doesn't have access to the chat, that talks a little bit about background investigations during COVID.
Perfect. And there's some workaround information in there. When COVID first started, there were some questions about a medical test that was conducted, and it involved measuring the respiratory rate and so on. And medical practitioners were reluctant to do so because it could involve exposure to COVID. So there was an alternate test that was recommended in there. So take a look at that post bulletin. There's some workarounds that can help you navigate this COVID obstacle. Okay, psychological. I'm gonna touch on this again. So need to ensure that on the psychological, really our suitability form, it has a psychologist's signature, printed name, medical license number, contact information. The same thing for a medical doctor, okay? Need to ensure that it shows that the box is checked, that it either is suitable or not suitable. I've come across a number of forms where the psychologist did not check the box. So therefore it's a null and void evaluation. It's as though it had never been done, and you got to go back and start that process again. It's not been checked. So hopefully if the evaluator can just reference his files and just sign a new form and sign and check the box, but ensure that it does check suitable or not suitable. Now, the bullet point number 3, I see usually with sheriff's departments, okay? So as we talked about earlier regarding jail deputies and deputies, what I would ensure that your psychological evaluator does is that they do not conduct an evaluation for a specific subtitle. And by subtitle, I mean they didn't do it for a jail deputy or for a correctional officer or a trainee. Ensure they do the evaluation for a peace officer. This way you do not get pigeonholed, because let's say that you did have a jail deputy, sheriff's department, and that jail deputy now you're going to consider them to roll them up to become a full-time deputy. And the psychological evaluation says this evaluation was done for a jail deputy. That could pose problems in the future. Again, if you guys ever get sued and a suing attorney finds out that a psych was done for, as identified by the evaluator, this was done for a jail deputy. Oh, sheriff, I see this done for a jail deputy, but was a psych evaluation done for this person as a peace officer? Well, no, because they were continuously employed and we didn't need to. Yeah, but it says just jail deputy. How do we know this person's qualified to be? So don't paint yourself into a corner. Just have your evaluator just put down, or just if even better, use the post-psychological evaluator form. Just put down peace officer. Don't pigeonhole yourself, okay? Also, again, ensure that it's not over 1 year. Again, it has to be from the date of appointment backwards 1 year. It can't be more than 1 year old. And if you ever want to confirm whether either your medical doctor or evaluator is licensed under the Department of Consumer Affairs, which they have to be in addition to the post requirements for psych evaluators, you can always search this website down here.
Marty, a couple of things. Jennifer asked if they needed to be a United States doctor. I would assume they need to be licensed medical doctors through Department of Consumer Affairs.
Right.
And it looks like our closing remarks have been moved to 11:45. So they've asked if we're pretty close to wrapping up.
Oh, so wow. Okay.
How close are we?
Wow. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I got 2 more things and I'll get there.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay. So Yeah, matter of fact, I can. So perfect. So that takes us to the very last tab in the background process if you're using the tabs, and again, encourage you to, and that's the miscellaneous, I think it's, or letter O tab. That is for all those other documents that an agency might need. For instance, as a question was asked, marriage certificates, or if they need to see NCIC printouts, or if you need to see crime reports. This is the perfect place to put the other documents, because we as post consultants, we're not looking for anything else other than what we just went through, that required document. So this is a perfect place to put those other tabs, okay? I'm sorry, those other documents. And one other thing, if you can help do us a favor, oh, let me also point out at the very bottom, should not contain prohibited items. So when it comes to medical and psych, all that we need to see and all that should be there in the background file are just the suitability declaration forms or the clearance forms. The actual exam from the doctor or the actual exam from the psychological evaluator should not be there. Those are HIPAA concerns. That should be kept in a separate personnel file. And I do come across that with some frequency. So just the clearance forms need to be there. And some agencies will even keep those separate, and there's no need to. It is no more a privacy issue than the rest of that whole folder. The clearance forms are no more or no less of a confidential or a confidential issue than the rest of that file. So the suitability forms can be included. Just ensure that you don't include the other medical stuff. And that's it. Oh, one other thing. If you could, for we as evaluators, I'm sorry, as far as regional consultants, if you could highlight with a yellow or whatever highlighter pen, graduation dates and diplomas, those things can be very difficult to find, and I'm sure you've had difficulty to find them. And then dates on DOJ and FBI returns and the credit reports. If you can highlight the dates for us, that'd be huge. And then again, just a reminder, if you make a copy of any official document, make sure that you do put that it was, the original was seen and verified by you, your date and initials. Okay, that's it. That's all I have.
Marty, the eval link has been posted in the chat.
It is right here as well. Just as a reminder, in order to get CPT credit, you have to, if you can, take a picture of this with your cell phone if you got to fly. But please go to this. This is how you get your CPT credit. Plus, it'll help me as well in this presentation. If you liked it, awesome. If you have constructive criticism, please let me know. I'm not perfect, not infallible, so your feedback is very welcome.
And for all of the attendees, feel free to jump over to the closing remarks. I'll stay in the room with the evaluation up. And if you have additional questions, feel free to write in, and at least we'll have the link up to the evaluation. But feel free to jump over to closing remarks at 11:45.
Thank you, everybody. Andrew, any questions answered next 2 minutes?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your attention, and hopefully this was of some benefit to you. And again, if you have any questions, you can always contact your regional consultant. Let me just back up real quick here. If you go to Post website, you'll find this map. Just type in this here. Type in this web link, and you'll get this map with each regional consultant's name. This is me here in Region 2, but there's 10 regions. So that's how you can get a hold of us if you have any questions in the future. And there's the survey again.
Okay, I think we're good. Marty, like I said, I'll stay in the room and keep the eval live for anybody that wants it, but certainly feel free to jump over to the closing remarks to wrap it.
Well, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that. And then I'll come back. Can you now, as co-host, can you close out the Zoom, or is that only?
I think so.
Do that?
No, I think I can take care of it.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you both, you and Michelle, for your help. I really appreciate it.
For anybody still on the line, I'll be closing it out here in another minute or so at 11:50. If you need anything, please send something in the chat. If not, thank you all for coming.